Yeah, I guess like one thing that like keeps coming up is the data, and you're a data scientist. You have like multiple degrees from University of Toronto and also with Cornell. Um, what is the data saying about COVID within Canada, United States, and across the world? Um, are things, is what we hear the actual truth, or, has there been a lot of misdiagnosis? Um, what have you seen in the last 4 months? And, could we expect a second wave? Is the second wave kind of already started, especially with some of the things that have happened in July within a multitude of different countries? Like, what do you see? What is the data? What is the data telling us, and how can the Canadian government improve? And hopefully, it's learned from this experience. When it's collecting data and how to dissect it and make it effective for preventative measures, going forth.
Well, I think having a having kind of a bunch of degrees in numerical sciences, et cetera, may qualify me to speak from the data perspective. But I mean, full disclosure, I mean, I'm not an epidemiologist, right? I'm not a virologist, and I can't say, I'm an infectious disease expert. But what I can say is that if you look at the data that is available, the data that is out there, so, imagine the entire world as a bunch of facts, right? The entire Wittgensteinian thing of the world is all that is the case. We can only judge based on what we see. So just from a purely mathematical, philosophical perspective, you can only really make a judgment on the things that you decide to, first of all, you decide to acknowledge, and that's, which has been made available to you. So therein lies, I think, the first problem. Not all the data is being made available to us. And so that's one of the problems. This came out of, they're still fighting over facts right now. So this came out of China. Notwithstanding the controversy of that, we have to acknowledge, we have to make the distinction between politics and feelings and nationalism versus what's actually occurred. This thing clearly came out of a city in a province in China, and now it's spread throughout the world. But we don't know what the true, the spread of this thing is. So we're only judging based on the things that have been measured and reported.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if we, for example, we say, oh, the number of cases are the caseload's going up by, 10% a day, 200 cases per day. Okay, you're making an assumption that that is all the cases out there. And then they're starting to, only later on, they started to talk about things like asymptomatic, et cetera. So what am I trying to say? Is I think people need to step back and say, if you're going to be structured in your thinking, you got to think about the fact that you won't really only make determinations in your life in general that are based on things that you are allowed to see. So you've got to start opening your eyes and poking into areas that maybe people aren't allowing you to see, or consider what else is there possibly that may be the case. That's not being shown to me. So I think this is one area that is certainly a big, kind of a blank spot for us. We don't know what the true rate of, what the true prevalence in the population is. They say by some estimates, the actual true prevalence of this thing is between 6 and 15 times. And I think they'd done some samples in the US where they said it might actually be 10x. So for every one person out there who is measured to have it, there are 10 others who are carriers, asymptomatic or not. Okay. So that might be the true prevalence out there. And this is just from some statistical sampling that they've done. Now that in itself may be, we may say, oh, is that heading towards herd immunity, et cetera? No, herd immunity, I mean, Sweden tried that experiment and it ended up not working out so well, right? I mean, you end up needing 70% plus of a population to have that. But there's going to be a lot of sick people, a lot of dead people along the way if we try and go along that route. So what is the data telling us? I think the data is telling us that there are a bunch of scientists out there who've tried to expose, certain facts about how it may spread, et cetera. But even to this day, a lot of the information about how the virus works, the statistics behind it, the epidemiology, autopsies, whatever they've done on that is only being held by a small handful of companies around the world with commercial interests, right? Like it's not like someone's taken this and just said, let's open source everything we know about this virus, the impact that it's had on whom, And let's do it in an anonymized way, and let's work with tech companies, right, to make sure that they've got the ability to do that, because the government sector does not have the full list of tools with which to be able to safely do this. So that's another thing that the data is telling us. And what, for me, the data is also saying is that this is also being very fear and politics driven. So rather than working with some tech companies who genuinely want to be able to help out, we've just decided, because it's the fashion these days to just go and, universally just go and take a shit on all tech companies, which I don't think is necessarily logical or fair. Sure, there's a bunch of things that some tech companies do that aren't necessarily fair, but we can't just paint all of them with the same, kind of stroke of distrust because something happened with Cambridge Analytica, a bunch of years ago, right? That there is data to be obtained if you want to be able to work with companies like Apple or Google, et cetera. You can anonymize that data and say, let's find out how this actually truly is spreading. So I don't think we're even, able to wrap our heads around, because there's so many things getting in the way of data-like thinking. So the data scientist part of me is going to say, okay, we've got a bunch of data, but are we really, as a society, allowing ourselves to accept that data? Like if I tell you an inconvenient truth, are you going to be willing to accept it? Right?
Yeah.
Or if I put something in the way for your political agenda, are you going to be willing to accept that? And I think we're seeing this in the US right now, where they're still not able to accept the data about masks because it's just become such a highly politicized situation. So, I mean, Fauci's out there, talking about this, and he's, world-renowned, doctor in this field, infectious disease expert. And he's throwing data left, right, and center at people, but people aren't willing to accept it. So what do? I mean, I try and go by the data, and I try and ask questions about, what's under the water line, but that's about the best that I can do.